Hi, I'm Matt and welcome to Airbrush X. What I'll be doing today is a Badger 150 airbrush review. Some of the things I'll be looking at today is the difference between a gravity-fed airbrush and a suction-fed airbrush. I'll explain the difference between a single action airbrush and a dual action airbrush. I'm going to look at how quickly colours can be changed on the Badger 150 airbrush. I'm going to talk about some of the internal parts and why they're so important. I'm going to talk about parts availability. I'll also be showing you some of the line widths and coverage that can be achieved with the airbrush. I'll also take you through what's included in the Badger 150 airbrush kit. Okay, what I'm going to show you today is the difference between dual action and single action airbrushes. This one here that I've got in my hand is a single action airbrush. As you can see, the trigger only has one movement, which is up and down. This gives you your air and paint at the same time. Doesn't give you any adjustment with line width or anything. The Badger 150 is a dual action. This has two trigger actions, which means you pull down, or push down I should say, and pull back, which means you can push down for air and then you pull back and you can increase the paint flow. This makes the Badger 150 really versatile because you can do really fine lines with this or a large coverage, and you can control the amount of paint that goes into the airbrush. What I'm going to do now is show you the difference between a Badger 150, which is a suction-fed airbrush, and this airbrush here, which is a gravity-fed airbrush. The main difference is the gravity-fed airbrush has the chamber on top, which feeds the paint via gravity through the airbrush, and then atomizes at the end through the end of the airbrush. The Badger 150 is a suction-fed airbrush, so it sucks the paint in, which means you can also use slightly thicker paints, and then it's fed through the airbrush, same thing, it's atomized at the end of the airbrush when you spray it out. The benefit I find with a suction-fed airbrush is the volume of paint that you can hold underneath it. It also, if you're painting fine lines, I find that it does give a little bit of, when you're resting on your finger, gives a little bit of balance. I find the benefit of the Badger 150 is the fact that you can have multiple jars set up with all your colours already, and you can pretty much click them on and off. And if you want to change colours, all you need to do, if you're using inks or acrylics, just give it a spray with some water through the entrance there. Flush it out a little bit, just make sure it runs clear. If you're using solvents or oil-based paints, use a bit of gum wash or thinners, and then all you do is clip your new colour on and away you go. Give it a bit of a squirt first just to get the paint running through, but fairly simple. The gravity-fed airbrush, you will have to do a fair bit of washing out to get the paint out of it. It's so important to have Teflon needle bearing and head washer because a lot of airbrushes are made with neoprene or rubber seals. The problem with neoprene or rubber seals is when you're using solvents or oil-based paints, it can eat through the neoprene or rubber, and if you're halfway through an airbrush artwork, you don't really want that happening because it'll affect the airflow and paint flow, and you'll have endless problems with trying to paint the rest of your artwork. What I'm going to do now is just show you why the Teflon head bearing or head washer and the Teflon needle bearing in this are so important when you're looking for airbrushes. What I've done here is just separated the body of an old Badger 150, just so I can show you this demonstration. As you can see, it's this section here. And the Teflon head washer, when you take the head off, see the little white ring just at the end there? That's your Teflon head washer. That's one of the important seals in your airbrush. The other one is your Teflon needle bearing, which I'll just get out for you now. That's your Teflon needle bearing there, tiny little bit of Teflon tubing. Highly important though with your airbrush, if you don't have these two set properly or put in properly, or they're a little bit old, they can wear a little bit after time. If you don't have them set properly though, your airbrush won't run properly. These create all the seals between paint and air in the airbrush, and if you don't keep a check on them, you can be spraying dots when you want to be doing lines, or you could get bursts of paint if they're not properly sealing. Parts for the Badger 150 are really easy to get now. When I first started, probably about 12 years ago, I'm in Australia and I had to get all my parts from America. This was okay because parts were quite cheap, but the problem was the shipping was quite expensive. Parts for these sort of airbrushes are available anywhere online. Pretty much if you type in the part, you should be able to find the corresponding place to buy them. What I'll do at the end of this video though is I'll put a link to my airbrush website, which is airbrushx.com, and I'll put a link so you can go through and check what parts, if you do need parts for a Badger 150, as well as the Badger 150 itself. What I'm going to be doing next for this next part of the review is just showing you how fine you can go with some of the lines on the Badger 150 airbrush. Also going to show you the coverage that can be achieved using the fine head assembly. What I'm going to do is do a few thin lines just to show you how fine I can go, and then I'm also going to cover the whole page. This is an A3 sheet, just to show you what can be achieved using the fine head assembly on the Badger 150. So if you just stick with me, I'll do a few lines and then do some coverage as well. This is also a really good exercise for practicing your line work and getting your lines really fine. Just set up an A3 page and do lines up and down and side to side, just to practice doing thin lines, thick lines. As you can see, I can go fairly fine with the lines. What I'll do is just bring it up close so you can have a better look at the lines. As you can see, some of them are almost hair width. Today is a little bit warm here. It's probably about 32 degrees Celsius, so not ideal conditions for airbrushing, as your paint will dry fairly quickly in the airbrush, so not the best conditions if you're going to be painting today. What I'm going to do now is just demonstrate how fine the lines are by putting one of the Badger 150 needles up against the lines that I've done. You can see that this line here is about the same width as the 150 needle, but as you move up you can see that the lines are actually a little bit thinner than the needle that go inside the 150 airbrush. So you really can get some decent fine lines out of this airbrush, as well as a lot of coverage really quickly. And if you use the different head assemblies, you can actually get more coverage, but your line widths will suffer a little bit. So if you want to have the fine line width and the coverage, I'd recommend using the fine head assembly. And then what I'm going to do now is to show you what sort of coverage and how long it's going to take to cover this page. So here we go. As you can see, that took roughly about a minute with the fine head assembly to cover an A3 sheet.
In this section of the review, I'll be showing you what you receive if you purchase a Badger 150-7 kit. And the reason I'm showing you the Badger 150 airbrush in kit form is because of value for money. If you're just a beginning artist and you're looking to start out with a professional airbrush and you're not sure what to buy, definitely have a look at this kit, because what you get in the kit, you get a Badger 150 airbrush, which is set up with a 0.5mm medium head assembly and the matching needle that corresponds with it. You get a protective cap for the head of the airbrush and also an attachable 3/4 ounce or 22mm jar. With the kit you also get two extra head assemblies, a fine 0.22mm head assembly and a heavy duty 0.75 head assembly. Both heads also have corresponding needles that match and they're included in the kit as well. There's also a small wrench for undoing certain parts on the airbrush. There's a 1/4 ounce colour cup and spare 2 ounce jar with a lid. To connect your airbrush to the compressor, there's an 8-foot braided hose or 2.4 metre hose, and it comes with a 1/4 inch fitting that'll adapt straight to your compressor. Having the variation in head sizes is really helpful if you're doing anything from artistic painting right through to temporary tattooing or t-shirt painting. So definitely take a look at this airbrush in kit form because it's definitely versatile. As you can see in this section, this is a few of my artworks that I've completed with the Badger 150 airbrush. They're done with the fine head assembly fitted, all done on around 600 by 900mm boards, so there's a fair bit of detail in these works as well as fairly sizable coverage in area. So you can see that the Badger 150 can complete sort of both tasks with no trouble, big coverage and fine line work. In summing up the Badger 150 airbrush, in this review I believe I've showed you one of the best all-rounders, probably the most versatile airbrush available for beginners or advanced airbrush artists. In the review I also covered what the airbrush can do as far as detail work and fine lines, also the amount of coverage it can do. We looked at the trigger system, which is a dual action trigger system. Also talked about how the airbrush is suction fed, not gravity fed, and how colours can be changed quickly. Also talked about some of the internal parts that are important if you're using solvent or oil-based paints. These parts are the Teflon head bearing and Teflon needle bearing. And I've also gone into how easy it is to get spare parts for the airbrush. So with all the information I've showed you about the Badger 150 airbrush, I hope this helps you make an informed decision when purchasing one. If you would like to purchase one, I'll have the link in the description, so I'll either have the link for just the airbrush by itself or the airbrush as a kit. I'll also have a link in the description which will link back to my airbrush site, which is airbrushx.com, and it'll have all the important parts listed there as well. If you did like this video, please give me a like and a thumbs up, and also if you did like it, please share it and subscribe to the channel Airbrush X, as I will be doing more tutorials and on tips and tricks and also airbrush needs. You can also find this information at airbrushx.com. I'll be putting all this on the site as well. And this has been Matt at Airbrush X.